God, we come into this, your place of worship. We come, some of us, to cast our cares upon you, others to raise voices of joy and celebration. Some just trying to figure out what life is all about. But we all come together into this place. Oh God, we stand before you, we kneel in front of you, and we know that you are here. For you have said, where two or more are gathered, there you shall be also. Oh God, we earnestly and fervently pray this morning that your Spirit would so move in this place, that you would open our eyes that we may see, our ears that we may hear, and oh God, open our hearts to be willing to hear your voice and to do your will. For we offer ourselves in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us now affirm our faith with the historic confession, the Apostles' Creed, which can be found printed in your bulletin. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. The third day he rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. If you have children with you this morning, I hope you let them come spend a few minutes with me. Good morning. That is awesome. Our communion rail is beginning to fill back up as our friends get back from vacation and all the things you've been doing all summer, and I am glad to see each and every one of you. It's awesome. It's a good morning when I see you and I hear those strong voices. So in the United Methodist Church, there's a man named John Wesley. And John Wesley and his brother Charles were really kind of who started what we now call our United Methodist Church. They were two guys who lived in England. And in fact, they came to Georgia at one point and were ministers in Georgia for a while. And then they went back to England. But they were who started our great Methodist church. And you know, everything's got rules, right? Some of y'all have started back to school. There's some rules at school. The teachers go over the rules the first day. How many of y'all gone over the rules at school? So what are some of the rules at school? Don't run in the hallway. Be quiet in the hallway. What's that? No hitting. Yes, ma'am. No, what in the cafeteria? Don't throw food in the cafeteria. Now, I don't know about y'all, but not running and talking down the hallway was one of the things I had the hardest thing with. The rule that I never could get straight was not talking. That was just not a rule that Pastor Charles followed very well at all, and it kept me in trouble. It still gets me in trouble to this very day. But John and Charles Wesley gave us 3 rules. And a man named Reuben Job, who was a United Methodist bishop, broke them down this way. It says, do no harm, do good, love God. I'm going to go back and do it, John and Wesley. He broke them down in 3 simple rules, and those rules are do no harm, love God, stay in love with God. Do no harm, do good. And the big phrase for stay in love with God is attend upon the ordinances of God. But let's think about that first one, do no harm. Basically, what do no harm means is that what John and Charles Wesley understood was the most important thing that we could do as people of faith is to not hurt other people. Because the first time we hurt someone else, they're not going to hear or be able to pay attention to anything else we do. And we hurt people by the things we say and the ways we treat them and just the way that we act around them. And so for us, one of the most important rules that we have as Christians is that we do no harm. Even before we do good, because sometimes all the good we do can't overcome when we've hurt somebody's feelings. And I suspect if you're like me, you've had your feelings hurt before. And whoever hurts your feelings, it's very difficult sometimes to overcome that. But the good news is, with God, we all can. We can forgive one another and love one another and attend upon the ordinances of God, which is to stay in love with each other and stay in love with God. So as y'all, you got that light? You want to block it for you? Look at that. How about that? Little preacher block. How about that? You don't need sunblock, and you just need preacher block. So as you're learning the rules at school, remember we got some rules in church, but they're pretty easy. It's just treat each other with dignity and respect, and we'll all be good. Will you bow your heads and pray with me this morning? Dear God, thank you for the gift of rules. Help us to do good, to try not to hurt other people's feelings. And when we do, forgive us so that we might love you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you can head out to Children's Church and go back and sit with your parents. seated. As we come to our time of prayer this morning, I invite you to see the prayer list that's located on the back of your bulletin, as well as know that there are prayer request cards located in the pew backs in front of you. We would love for you to share any prayer requests you have, any celebrations you would like to share. I just want to lift up a few prayer requests in particular to you. Margaret Davis continues to be in ill health and is back at Eastside Medical Center, and Hubert and Margaret could certainly use our prayers. Barbara Pate's son, Steve Daniel, ended his valiant battle with cancer on this past Thursday, and we will celebrate his life this afternoon in Carrollton. He was an amazing young man, and Barbara is incredibly heartbroken this morning, and this is the third anniversary of Tom's death as well. So a lot on her heart this morning, and certainly we want to remember Barbara and Steve and his family this morning. One that's not been on our prayer list, and I will talk a little bit about this in general in the sermon in a few minutes, is a young couple whose wedding I officiated 8 years ago. Ashley lost her valiant battle with breast cancer this past Monday morning, leaving behind 2 little girls. And so your pastor comes this morning with a heavy heart, with so many people suffering, and in ways that, quite frankly, I don't begin to understand. But I do know this. I know in the midst of pain and suffering, God is present with us, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that from the story of Joseph this morning. But I know that many of you bring heartache and difficulties into this place every Sunday morning. I'm the kind of pastor who tries to focus on the joy in life and the things that Christ brings into our lives that brings us joy. But at the end of the day, I also know this is a broken and hurt world. And so sometimes we just have to acknowledge that, and we have to be able to lift that to God, share that with one another. And so it is in that attitude that I invite you now to go to God with me in prayer. Almighty God, too many of us have sat with a loved one who has suffered in some way that is unimaginable. So many diseases which cover the face of the earth, and so many ways that people struggle to battle those diseases. I would venture to guess, oh God, that most everybody, if not everyone in this room, has somehow, some way been impacted by the disease of cancer, and that all of us in this room have heard of the courageous battles people wage against that terrible disease. But for all people everywhere this morning, oh God, who suffer in any way, we lift them up to you, and we lift their families up to you. We lift those who suffer to you for healing, and we lift their families to you for strength. And we lift all of us to you for understanding. Oh God, just beyond disease is the pain that comes from discord and disagreement that finds its way to hatred and bitterness, and in the worst case, violence and war. Oh God, that we could seek your face, that we could seek your peace, that somehow we could see each other as you see us, that we could love each other the way you love us. For every person on this planet is your child, your creation. Yet, oh God, somehow, some way, we've messed it up so bad that we forget that from time to time. So, God, we sit with our heads bowed in this beautiful place. And we wonder, we ponder, and we lift all of this to you. God, we also come to give thanks for all that we have, because despite all of those things we have just shared, we also know of the great blessings that are ours, the many ways you enrich our life through relationships, and that even in the midst of our difficulties, through you there is always a ray of hope. So, God, we come to express our appreciation for that, to give back to you just a small portion of all that we've received, and ask now that you would receive these, your tithes and our offerings. Oh, God, that you would make us good stewards over them, that you would increase the generosity of this congregation, that we might continue to be the hands and feet of Christ to this community, to this city, and throughout the world. So, God, we ask that you would accept these our prayers and accept these our gifts. For we offer them in the name of Christ our Lord, who taught us when we gather we should pray with one voice. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
So sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, just to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, and how I've proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. I'm so glad I've learned to trust him, precious Jesus, Savior, friend, and I know that he is with me, will be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, and how I've proved him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Oh, for grace to trust
keep promising, I was going to say threatening, but I don't know it'd be a threat because some people might appreciate that, is that I keep promising one Sunday after one of our beautiful singers sings something like that, I'm just going to sit down and we're going to go home. And I'm going to do it one Sunday. I promise you, one Sunday I'm going to do it. But I got something on my heart this morning, so we'll keep on plugging away. I shared with you in the prayer that it was one of those weeks in ministry that brings perspective to life. In my 15 years of full-time ministry, 20 years of being in lay and active ministry, far too often I've had to be at the bedsides of families and people who have dealt with the brutal disease of cancer, and it's just, it doesn't get any easier. I told somebody this week that you would think it would probably get easier, and then I decided that if it ever stopped hurting this bad, that I probably should stop what I'm doing. Because anytime you see someone suffer, particularly someone who you know well, it takes a piece out of you. You leave a piece of you behind. And I know, I look around this room and I know how many of you have personally dealt with that on so many different levels. And so I'm very careful with my theology around that. God doesn't cause those things to happen, but God is present in the midst of them. We'll talk a little bit about that in this sermon this morning. But just share that as we begin this few minutes together this morning, as we think about together the idea of finding good when others mean harm. Finding good when others mean harm. The story of Joseph in Genesis is one of the most amazing stories in the Bible. It may be one of the most cohesive, and certainly is the most cohesive story in Genesis. Most of us are familiar in some way, shape, or form with Joseph. If we're not directly and understand Joseph, we know that he had a pretty cool cape he got to wear around, right? How many of you ever seen Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? A handful of us. Y'all know I well chronicled my love for musicals and musical theater, and that's among my favorite. But Joseph, if you didn't bring a Bible this morning, if you'll pull out your pew Bibles and that are in front of you, they're the little book in between the two big books, the hymnals. The little book is the Bible in the middle. You may have brought your own Bible, and if so, if you brought your own Bible, you probably know where this is. And so, but you'll find that Bible if you turn to page 32. I think is what I saw when I looked. Page 32 is Genesis chapter 37, and it begins the story of Joseph. Now we can't, the story of Joseph goes from chapter 37 to chapter 50 in the book of Genesis. It rounds out, it wraps up the book of Genesis. And we're not going to read all of that. It would take us the time we have left just to read that. But I want to kind of hit on three parts, and then I want us to talk a little bit about this finding good when others mean harm. So the beginning of the story of Joseph goes something like this. Jacob had settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. And this is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. He was a tattletale. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age and had made him a long robe with sleeves. Now this is the New Revised Standard Version we have, and the old Hebrew will say a coat of many colors or a fancy tunic. The Hebrew's uncertain, and so the traditional words have been translated here, a long robe with sleeves. Now, I'm an only child, so I was always my mom's favorite. And Zach is an only child, so he is our favorite. How many of you who have brothers and sisters believe that one of your siblings, and it might be you, is the favorite or was the favorite of your parents? Okay, see, it's endemic, it's epidemic. It hasn't changed since this many years ago. All of us who have brothers and sisters feel like maybe one of them is the favorite. And the fact of the matter is, it's probably true. Shannon's an identical twin and has an older brother, and they all think they're the favorite. I've shared this, I think, before, but when Shannon and I first started dating, it was one of our first Christmases together, and the conversation was around being an only child and how only children, they started picking on me, and they say, you know, you're an only child because you've always had everything you've wanted, and you get to do whatever you want to do when you want to do it. And it was the first time that I thought Shannon's dad might actually like me, because he sat back in his chair and he crossed his arms and he said, well, if those are the traits of an only child, then I have 3 only children. But when his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than they loved them, they hated him. And they could not speak peaceably to him. Often has been said that love and hate are 2 sides of the same coin. They're the same emotion. They're the same emotion that find themselves on 2 ends of the spectrum. And I think this same problem that we have in this verse is the same problem that plagues us today, is we feel like we've either got to love or hate. I could probably stop the sermon right now, because I could probably tell you that everything bad that's going on in the world today is because we feel like we've either got to love or hate. We have lost the ability to agree, to disagree. I've played a few games of pickup basketball in my life, and one of the things that you'll often hear said on a pickup basketball court is no harm. Y'all know, no foul. But we've decided that everything in life harms us, even when it doesn't. We look for things that harm us, and then we end up with this bitterness in our heart. Joseph doesn't help himself out. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said, listen to this dream I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and then your sheaves gathered around it, and they bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us, and are you indeed to have dominion over us? So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. Verses 9 through 11 continue to talk about his dreams, and his father gets word of this. And this is when we realize that the problem here is communication, because nowhere in here is it ever said that Joseph's brothers go to their dad and say, look, Dad, we get it. Joseph was the child you'd always wanted, and you love him, and we get that. But if you could just ease up a little bit sometime. You know, just throw us a little bone every once in a while. Just kind of, you know, even things out every now and again. I think everything would be okay. And although they kind of talk back to their brother, it doesn't sound as though they ever sat down with their brother and said, hey, look, dude, we know Dad loves you, but we're all in this together. How about we all kind of respect one another and love one another and find a way through this? The reason that I believe that never happened is because when Jacob finds out about this, he rebukes Joseph as though he had never heard of these problems before. And if Joseph is 17 years old, these problems have been brewing for quite a while. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And Joseph said, here I am. And so Jacob said, go now and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent them into the valley of Hebron. And when he came to Shechem, a man who was wandering the fields asked him, who are you seeking? And he said, I'm seeking my brothers. And he said, well, They've gone away, for I heard them say, let us go on to Dothan. And so Joseph went up after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him from a distance, and before he came to near to them, they conspired to kill him. And so they conspired to kill him. One of his brothers says, I don't think that's a good idea. Why don't we throw him in the pit? There won't be any water, and we can kind of let this all go. And his brother had hoped to go back and rescue him. And then this callous thing, they've thrown their brother in a pit and left him to die, and they go to eat lunch as though nothing had ever happened. And then they see a way out. There's a group of travelers who come by, and they figure, hey, we can clean this up. We can sell them into slavery, and we can be done with this. And they do. And Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt. The story is amazing. If you read the whole thing, and I challenge you this week, if you go home, grab a Bible, read Genesis 37 through 50, read this entire saga. We're going to hit a couple more highlights, but it was pretty crazy stuff. He becomes servant of some folks, and his master's wife makes inappropriate advances and then turns it on him, and he ends up in jail, and then he starts telling about these dreams again, and ultimately these dreams get him back out of jail, and ultimately he ascends to be a very powerful person in Egypt. In fact, if we read the Hebrew correctly, second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. There's famine, and Joseph had foreseen the famine, and Joseph had been able to secure enough food for Egypt, but yet his family in a foreign land is starving, and they've come seeking help. And Joseph encounters his brothers, and in chapter 45, there's an incredible scene in which Joseph lets himself be known to his brothers. It's a scene that seems to be filled with reconciliation. Yet, I'm not sure how clean it was. I'm not sure that all of that bitterness of the past went away in this one part of the story. But then we come to chapter 50. The very last chapter in the book of Genesis, and we get to chapter 50, and Jacob has died. And beginning in verse 15, we hear these words from Joseph, or these words about Joseph. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him, and then his brothers also wept and fell down before him and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph, wait, let me stop there. Joseph had a dream one time, right? And in Joseph's dream, they all bowed down to him. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do me harm, God intended it for good." Even though you intended to do me harm, God intended it for good. Joseph had all the power in this situation. His brothers knew it. What's pretty clear in this is that Joseph had forgiven them, and they had heard that, but sometimes it's more difficult to forgive ourselves than it is for us to forgive others. The fact of the matter is just as I know we've all probably suffered and seen others suffer, I also probably know at some point in our lives we've done something to hurt someone else. And for far too many, the pain of that lingers. It's hard to reach out and grab words and pull them back. It's difficult to unsend a letter or an email. It's tough when we've hurt someone else. And there's fear involved. There's fear on both sides of this equation. One of the commentaries that I love to study is through a website, and one of the commentators is Catherine Schifferdecker from Luther Seminary. In writing on this Joseph narrative, she says, the descendants of Abraham and all humanity continue to be deeply flawed, but through it all, God fulfills God's promises and provides for God's creation. The fact of the matter is, we are all deeply flawed. Getting full circle to what we shared with the children this morning. The United Methodist Book of Discipline, as it lays out how the church is to be ordered and structured. The beginning, it talks about what we believe, and it lays out these rules. When John and Charles Wesley were starting the first societies, before they ever had any idea that we would ever become anything called the United Methodist Church, John Wesley and Charles wrote these general rules. I won't read them all, but I want to point out a couple of things about them. He starts by saying, there's only one condition previously required of those who desire admission into these societies. I'm not sure how well this would sell in today's world, but this is what it was. A desire to flee from the wrath to come and to be saved from their sins. We don't really like talking about sin. You know, that's one of those words that we just don't like talking about. It makes us uncomfortable. We don't like talking about sermons or preachers anymore. Preachers are communicators, and we don't like talking about sermons. Sermons are messages in many contemporary circles, because all of those, for some reason, have a connotation of judgment, and so we try to kind of purify some of those things to make ourselves feel better. But wherever this is really fixed in the soul, it will be shown by its fruits. I love that line. But wherever this is really fixed in the soul, it will be shown by its fruits. In other words, if we're following these rules, it will be evident by the way we live. It is therefore expected of all who continue therein that they should continue to evidence their desire of salvation first by doing no harm. And it's really just do no harm. When the bishop asked the prospective ordinands this question on the stage at annual conference, they're asked to say, do no harm, do good, attend upon all the ordinances of God. But Wesley being Wesley, he has to expand upon it a little bit. And so he writes, do no harm by avoiding evil of every kind, especially that which is most generally practiced, such as. And then he goes out and lays out what he thinks are evil in the world. Taking the name of God in vain. The profaning of the day of the Lord, either by doing ordinary work therein or buying or selling. And so maybe now I'll have my little preacher rant for the morning. My son and my wife and my mom are at a soccer tournament this morning, because part of what we've lost in our society is an appreciation and a respect for our day of worship, and so it's considered appropriate that tournaments and games happen early on Sunday mornings. I guess there's two ways to battle that. One way is just to get frustrated. I think the more appropriate way would be to go set up church at one of the tournaments, and I may just do that. I may next season just take off a couple of Sundays when it's happening, and I won't wear my robe. That'd be silly, but I may just show up and make it known that if anybody on a Sunday morning who feels compelled to be at the soccer fields would like to share in a word of prayer or thanksgiving, that maybe we can do that. Maybe that's a more effective way to reach out to those who are there. the profaning of the day of the Lord, either by doing ordinary work therein or by buying or selling. Drunkenness, buying or selling spirits as liquors or drinking them, unless in the case of extreme necessity. He leaves an out there. Did you see that? Drunkenness, buying or selling spirituous liquors or drinking them, unless, and I'm not making fun of this. I mean, substance abuse is a as a pastor, particularly over the last 11 years, being in ministry in the city of Atlanta and working with those who have addictions, it's not a funny thing. And Wesley knew that and knew how terrible all forms of addiction can be, and that all it does is separate us from God. Slaveholding, the buying or selling of slaves, fighting, quarreling, brawling, brother going to law with brother, returning evil for evil or railing for railing, the using of many words in buying or selling. Have you seen a contract lately that you got to sign to get like cable or internet or any of that? I'm just going to tell them they're evil next time they call and go on about my business. Uncharitable or unprofitable conversation, particularly speaking evil of magistrates or of ministers. Doing to others as we would not they should do unto us. Doing what we know is not for the glory of God. Taking on such diversions as cannot be used in the name of the Lord Jesus. Softness and needless self-indulgence. The whole first page is doing no harm. The second page is do good and attend upon the ordinances of God. What this tells me is that what John Wesley believed is the most important part of our Christian faith was how we learn not to hurt other people. Because in so doing, the other things would kind of fall into place because we know how to do good. Unfortunately, the human condition, original sin, says that we have a really hard time treating each other the way that God intended. And so he goes on to describe how you do good. And the very last thing he talks about, you would think this would be first, but it's not, is worship and Scripture and communion. And it's not because these things are least important, they're most important. But what Wesley understood is for us to really gain all that we need to gain from that, we have to come into God's presence with as a pure a heart as is humanly possible so that we can truly be open to what God has in store for us. And ultimately, what God will do is whatever we intend for harm, God will use for good. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hymn is hymn 381, Savior like a shepherd lead us. Will you stand as we sing together the first and the last verses? Earlier this week, I was honored to be invited by Mayor Reed to have a statement of unity at one of his annual luncheon that he shares with the faith-based community. And someone asked me, what is a statement of unity? And I'll be honest, I wasn't really sure when I got started. But one of the things I said is that we've lost the ability to disagree with dignity in our world. And maybe the lesson of Joseph this morning is we never learned how to do it to begin with. And so my challenge, my charge to all of us this morning, let's learn how to disagree with dignity. Let's try not to do harm, but when harm has been done, let the world know that God can bring good from what we meant to be a mess. So go forth in peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And all God's family said.